What is up, family? Welcome to another episode of Let's Parlay, where we are here to encourage you to bet on yourself and pursue all that life has in store for you. I am your host, Monty Taylor, and for this episode, I really want to encourage people to do a bit of a reflection on the year of 2025 for yourself, and I want to share what I've reflected on over this past year. So, this might be a little bit longer than normal episodes, but hang tight. We're going to get through it. All right. Well, without further ado, let's parlay. Thanks for tuning in to another episode, family. Really appreciate y'all sticking through with me throughout this entire year. And yeah, we're at episode 29. I think I've mentioned this multiple times. I have a goal of getting to 30 episodes before the end of this year. I'm dropping this episode today on Monday, and then I will have I will have a Wednesday episode that will drop before the new year. Okay, so I'll just kind of tee things up for you for this episode and then for the next one. So what I'm doing in this episode is just sharing what I've reflected on, some of the notes that I've taken just in my own time. And it's been quite a bit, and I'm not sure if I'm going to get it in under 30 minutes. So if this is a little bit longer, just bear with me. And I think it'll be very worth it for you because I'm sure that there's going to be things you can reflect on for yourself. And then the following episode, which will be the New Year's Eve episode, that will be where I share how I'm using this and what I'm going to do with this information and this reflection for 2026. That'll be what systems I'm going to implement, what habits I want to adhere to, and different affirmations that I want to speak to myself. And all of that I'm sharing is just what works for me. And I'm hoping that more than anything, I'm not even hoping, I'm pretty damn confident that if you decide to do similar things for yourself, one, in reflecting on 2025, and two, using that reflection to build yourself a system and a guide for 2026, 2026 will be a great year because you're actually applying what you've learned from the previous year and taking it into 2026 to form different systems and habits and mindsets that will help you get to where you want to go. So that was a lot of rambling to introduce all of this, but let's dive right into it. So the way that I structured this was I started off by talking about my wins for 2025. And then there's another portion where I titled it Lessons Learned. Okay, so I know that there's like a lot of ways where you could say like failures or losses or whatever. And I never look at any of the things that happened that I didn't expect as a failure. I just look at them as, oh, that didn't come out as I expected. So it's a lesson. And that is how I structured this. So I'm going to just share with you the positive first, right? You know, the wins that I've had from this past year. And I'm going to try to, go through it as efficiently as I possibly can. But all of this to say that I want you to do this similar exercise for yourself. Reflect on 2025, write out a list of your wins, write out a list of lessons learned, and really take your time with it. Don't rush that process. This is your life that we're talking about. So let's really invest into this process. All right, so first things first, for me personally, my number one win, and the first thing that came up for me, I didn't really order this, but the first thing that came up for me was how I've dedicated my life to Christ this year and done it with more consistency. A lot of this comes under the umbrella of my own personal relationship with the Lord. And prior to this year, I've just been kind of like in and out and not really consistent. I've had really strong periods where I was strong in belief, but maybe not as educated in what I actually believed in. I just felt something and knew for sure. But this year was me not only learning who God was, or who God is, I should say, but also learning my relationship with God and what that could look like for me. So a lot of this can come under the umbrella of like, going to church, reading the Bible, for me, also building a community. Here in Austin, I've met other believers. other believers who are also entrepreneurs, which is just, a really strong point of connection because we live a very similar lifestyle, but also have very similar principles. And it's hard to find the match of two. So that's been really helpful. And then also being able to speak about my faith publicly and proclaim it online and in social media on this podcast. I felt like that's been a huge win for me because it holds me accountable to continue to learn and continuing to act and meet up to God's standard. So that's been a lot of what I felt was my dedication to Christ. I've tithed throughout the majority of this year. There's been some months where, it was a little bit tough for your boy, so I wasn't able to tithe those months. And I've also just made a lot of progress in, my relationship to sin and also to like how I date and how I view those relationships as well too, because I feel like that's been a major part of my life that I've shifted on recently, especially as I've turned 30 this past year. I'm sure most people who can resonate with turning 30, some things just start to change. You just start to think a bit differently. So that was my number one win, was just my dedication to Christ and being so consistent throughout this year. Now, I will say it wasn't perfect, but it was definitely a lot better than any other year in my life. And that's a huge win. So I marked that off. Okay. The next one that I wrote down was getting a closer relationship with both of my parents and having it centered around faith and spiritual experiences, right? So I remember at the beginning of this year, it was a really interesting thing that happened. But I was walking, and this was in the middle of me doing 75 hard. So I walked outside all the time, and I was just walking in nature. There was nobody around. And I remember just like having a moment where I visualized, or maybe a vision sort of came to me, where I was in church with my mother, and both, my grandmother, like, so my mom's mom was like telling me like, yes, that, like, we're proud of you for this, like, take her there. And then same thing with my father. Like, it was like me in church with him, or talking about God. And I remember my grandfather, who's passed away, also telling me like, yes, like, I'm proud of you, dude. And I just, I broke down crying because I was just like, wow, like that feels like a heavy weight and a heavy responsibility, but also it was like a cry out of joy that I would be bestowed such a responsibility. And both of those things happened in their own unique way. Like, when my mom came to visit me during my birthday month, we went to church together, and it was during Mother's Day, and we both were in there just crying our eyes out. And my dad, I think him and I have also had a lot more conversations about the Bible because we've both finished it. And he finished it before me, but I've just recently finished it. So our conversations have become a lot more rooted in the Word. And I just think that when you have that perspective, it allows both parties to be able to, share things that help you through very emotional periods. Because when I've gotten emotional, or even when anyone gets emotional, God tends to get out of the equation, right? Like, it's very me focused, it's very self-centered. And whenever you have two people who are on the same accord about, God's presence in your life, it just becomes a lot easier to help someone with perspective, and realizing that whatever challenges you may be facing, oh, this is what God has given you as a challenge, as opposed to, oh, I'm terrible, or life is trying to take me down or take me out. It just completely flips the entire script. So that was a big, big win, was being able to not only receive that counsel from my parents, because I've always, like, being the oldest and my mom's only child, I've just always been responsible and didn't really get into much trouble. So when I feel like I'm not doing what I'm supposed to do, I feel like I might be failing, or I'm not meeting up to the standard that I normally do. And it was just great to get that perspective from my mother that like, hey, she's gonna support me through the trials and tribulations, the roller coaster of life. And same thing with my father. And just to hear them open up about some of their challenges that I never really knew about as a result of me sharing my challenges from this past year. So great conversations, and I feel like it really has bonded us a lot more than ever before because I've learned to lean on them, when I usually don't ever try to lean on them and stuff. So that's been really, really helpful. Um, this next one, I'm not gonna go into detail about the decision that was made, but let's just say that this win is coming to the realization that I need to humble myself. I need to humble myself. I need to get into uncomfortable situations in order to go through a period of building character again, right? So for me personally, I have always had very comfortable situations post, like graduation from college. So I got my engineering job. I lived with my mom for 2 years. And then after living with my mom, I got my own place and I pretty much just lived by myself in very, comfortable apartments. I had a 1 bedroom in Philly that was a little bit of a rougher area, I was off Girard and 28th Street. And that, it's kind of, on the way to being gentrified, but it wasn't all the way there when I was there. So humbling, but still the apartment was my own, and it was still nice on the inside for the most part. Then I moved to LA, after being on Big Brother and stuff, and I got a 2 bedroom apartment, and I had all this space, and I was originally intending to live with someone who I was talking to at that time, and we're not going to go down that route, but that didn't happen, and I wound up staying in that 2 bedroom for the entire time that I was in LA, which was 2 years. So, yeah, very comfortable, very spacious, and still was very like hyper independent and didn't want to move anybody in or anything like that. I just wanted it to myself, right? And then moving to Austin, moving into this beautiful apartment, which I very much appreciate, and it was definitely cheaper than what I was paying in Los Angeles. And there's a whole bunch of amenities here that you could take advantage of, the rooftop pool, a nice gym, all this sort of stuff. And one, I don't use the majority of it on a consistent basis. And then two, the other thing is that like, yeah, it's just like another level of comfort that makes me feel very at ease with where I'm at. And I'm gonna leave it there for now. I will share the decision that I've made and what that will entail sooner rather than later, but just not now because I just don't need that to be floating about at the moment. So, okay, we're gonna move on to the next one. The next win that I had was completing 75 hard, which I feel like was, I don't know. I mean, it didn't really feel that hard, to be honest with you, especially as someone who works remote and can really control my own schedule. I think maybe I have a bit of a different perspective on it and not the same challenges as someone who has to go into an office, because I could see that being really tough to do. But either way, I mean, you're gonna make it work regardless. Yeah, that was a great challenge for me. And my brother and I had decided to do it at the beginning of the year. I got into the best shape that I've ever been into. I think I got down to like 9.5% body fat, which was crazy. I've never, seen my body to that level while also maintaining majority of my strength and my muscle. And yeah, I got some lab work done, said my biological age was like 21 years old. I think this was back in April when I got that lab work done. My Aura ring that I use that tracks a lot of my biometrics and whatnot said that my heart age was as low as like 3 years younger than my actual age. So that was cool that my cardiovascular health was improving. Yeah, just a lot of things physically that I had never accomplished before had been accomplished this year as a result of 75 hard. And yeah, I mean, I've been able to maintain for the most part, you know, and I have a really good understanding of like, oh, you know, if I eat this amount of calories and if I do this level of activity, I can get to this level of body fat, or I can add this amount of muscle, right? So it just becomes a lot more scientific. So yeah, that was a big win. Another win was this one's funny because it was on my dream board to read 12 books for this year. And I read those 12 books by like, it had to have been by July-ish or something. I think it was by July that I read them. And I was like, mission accomplished. You know, I read 12 books. Great. And I've read a total of 14 books this year. So it's like, it's just so interesting when you hit a goal that you say, like, after that, it doesn't really, it can be so easy to just not push past that once you've reached that goal. At least when it comes to reading, because I don't particularly enjoy the act of reading. I do enjoy what I get from reading. And it's one of those things where it's a short-term pain for a long-term gain, right? So anyway, I read 14 books this year, and I'm really proud of myself for doing that. I think that's probably the most that I've read in a year before. But I realized that I can probably read like 24 books in a year if I actually, you know, stayed consistent with it and stayed locked in. So yeah, so just wanted to share that. That was a huge win for me as well. Another thing that I wanted to share, and I don't know if I've mentioned too much about this, but I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, which is sort of like a form of IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. But I was diagnosed with that right before I left LA. So that was about yeah, a year, no, yeah, a year and some change ago. A year and some change ago. And that diagnosis and that whole experience was just a very eye-opening, yeah, very eye-opening experience because I learned how much I'm gonna have to do in order to find a solution that makes sense for me and my preferences. Because when I was diagnosed, the doctor pretty much said, yeah, we don't know how this is coming about. You know, there's not necessarily a cure for it. Essentially, and just for those who don't know, it's just inflammation around the colon. So it just affects your digestive process. It could slow things down. I'm going to spare you from some other details of it, and you can look that up yourself. But I have a mild version of it, or I should say had. And yeah, what happened is I asked, I was like, okay, well, how do I manage this? Like, you know, is there any dietary things that you could let me know about? He was like, you know, you can look stuff up online and see. And I was like, okay, well, if I get symptoms again, he was like, just come on back in and, you know, we'll get you your medication, and then you'll take that medication, and then you'll just, you know, go back to your normal life. And I was like, that doesn't seem like the best approach. Like, maybe there's something dietary causing this. I don't know. Like, that's all you got. And to me, that was unacceptable. So what happened is I took the medication once they gave me the diagnosis, just because I wanted to be done with the symptoms. And yeah, probably a month or two, maybe 3 months later, I started experiencing the symptoms again. And I was like, oh, hell no. Like, all right, let's do a deep dive into what I'm eating. I just started to like remove things and then build up my diet from there to like introduce things, see what caused any of the symptoms. And then I also just did some research on anti-inflammatory, you know, supplements and things that you can use in order to reduce the inflammation in the colon. And I did a combination of that and dietary changes. Mainly not eating dairy was the big thing for me. That seems to be a big culprit. Whenever I do that, it definitely slows things down. What was the other one? I think I'm still experimenting with beef because I feel like beef might have an impact on, you know, like the symptoms. But anyway, that's just the high level. But what I found was that turmeric is a very, very good supplement, or, you know, food item that you can use to reduce inflammation. So I just supplement consistently with turmeric, and I try to avoid dairy. And now I'm pretty much back to normal. So that was a huge win for me, and just wanted to share that as well. The other thing, obviously, is starting this podcast. I remember when I was filming for Big Brother and I was in that house, I remember mentioning it so many times to everybody else who was on the cast, like, especially when you're in there so long, you're like, man, like this would be a great idea to do. And I kept talking about it, talking about it. Then when I moved to Los Angeles, I had just gotten distracted by so many other opportunities and other things that I was getting into, and really just didn't understand how I would structure it and what I would, you know, like what I would do logistically to make it work, right? So that was a part of it, and I was plenty distracted in Los Angeles as well too. But nonetheless, I moved to Austin, and I knew that I wanted to get this thing officially started, and I started this year. I believe in the middle of the year, sometime around, was it April, May? I can't remember exactly when, but anyway, my goal, again, like I said, to hit 30 episodes. We are on the way. We're at episode 29, and then episode 30 will drop tomorrow. So that is a huge win for me. I followed through with what I said I was going to do. So very much appreciate that, and also appreciate everybody for tuning in. Subscribe if you haven't done it already, by the way. Share this with a friend. All right, the next one. Sticking to my daily personal development habits throughout most of the year. I'd say, like, with travel and visiting family, it could be tough to do everything the same that you would do when you're back home. But just to share with you what my habits are that seem to work the best for me. One, journaling before the end of the night. What I do is I pick up my iPhone, and there's a journal app in there now, and I'll just record a voice message. And I'll just talk for anywhere between 3 and 20 minutes about whatever's on my mind and whatever happened throughout the day. So that's one. Writing down 3 things that I'm grateful for, writing down 3 things that were wins at the end of the day as well too. The gratitude I do in the morning. Stating my affirmations. I kind of fell off on this probably during the summer. I don't know why, but I'm like, summertime is just I'm not productive. There's just many distractions and stuff, and maybe a lot of y'all can resonate with this, but yeah, it was something that I kind of fell off on, and I think I started to lose track of why I was doing it. And as of recently, I've gotten back on it and realized, like, oh, this is important because I got things I want to accomplish and I got to speak them into existence. Reading the Bible, obviously, I talked about that with my faith. Praying, stretching. Stretching is something that I've done most mornings out of this year, and it's all about like 15 minutes. It's nothing crazy, but it's sort of like a yoga flow stretch situation. And yeah, I haven't really had any significant like lower back pain or injuries or anything like spinal related or anything. So yeah, I feel like that may have something to do with it. So I'm very, very proud of myself for that. And then also reading for 30 minutes. But like I said, that fell off a lot during the summer and probably later in the year. But I've picked up my habit again, and I've started to read yet again. So yeah, those are some of those habits that I stuck to throughout most of this year. The other thing that I wanted to mention, which is more recent, is just getting more organized with my content and with essentially the marketing of my coaching business, because it's been the one thing, y'all, that like I'm typically not the most organized person in general. I'm not like, if you came into my apartment, everything's put together and stuff, and that's my mother's doing. Like she just set a certain standard for how your apartment should look all the time. So I'm organized with things. But when it comes to like plans and making plans with others, or even just for myself, it could be a bit of a challenge for your boy. However, I've recently downloaded or started using the Notion app. So if you're a content creator, or if you just want to have a tool that helps you just organize things, Notion has been pretty cool for me. So I just wanted to, I'm not like sponsored by them or anything. I just use them. And I have been able to just really like pre-plan a lot of my content so that I can actually stick to posting on a consistent basis, because I feel like that's the thing that I always struggle with, is planning content and having enough batched up and planned to post. And I feel like recently I've gotten a good handle on that. So that's been a huge win for me as well too. The other thing I was going to mention was that I had volunteered this year serving the homeless. And to me, that was really, really good perspective, because I started to realize that my problems are not really important. I have a place to stay, I have people I can call. And when you talk to a lot of folks who are on the street, that is not the case. They do not have people to call. Or if they do, those people, may not want anything to do with them for whatever reason. Or, they're not able to find, a consistent line of income. Or they may be dealing with mental health, right? Or there's so many different situations that I've heard. And to be able to pray over those people, to talk about Jesus with them, and also to just give them an encouraging word and to let them be seen, I think has been really cool. Yeah, it's been a really nice experience to do that. And being that both of my, I was born in New York and both of my parents grew up in New York, there's definitely a different mindset towards homeless folks when you grow up in a city like New York, where there's so many. And I'm glad that I was able to overcome that, and yeah, just focus on viewing them as people and not as like, oh, they are homeless and that's their only identity. So yeah, that's been a really, really nice experience for me in 2025. Okay, and the last win that I'm going to mention is something that, may not seem like that big of a deal, but is really a big deal for me, is I just I stopped objectifying myself on social media. Plain and simple. I used to post a lot of things to get likes and engagement, and that was a lot of like the mindset that I got from LA, which is, that's what everybody is focused on out there, especially because everyone has a social media presence and it's all about brand deals and getting stuff. But yeah, I realized that I'm a coach, and especially being a coach that talks about my faith, if I'm posting stuff with me chest naked all the time, it doesn't seem like the most productive thing to do for speaking to the clients that I want to work with and just helping people, right? So, yeah, I wanted to remove all the lustful nature from my page and really focus on the value that I wanted to extend out to people who came across my page, and not trying to get people to like or whatever have you, because a lot of those likes I actually don't want, is what I realized. And they're coming from people who are lusting after someone or myself. So anyway, those are my wins. Let's transition to the lessons that I've learned. So like the wins that I shared, I'm not going to say that these come in any particular order, but the order that I'm sharing them is how they came up to me, right? So the first thing on this list of lessons learned is something that I've talked about in previous podcast episodes quite a bit. So you may see this one coming, but it's just the fact that doing life on my own isn't sustainable, and that we as humans are not designed to be by ourselves. The reason why I say that is, one, there's already enough science to back that up, like talking about isolation and the propensity for isolation to lead to, all sorts of different terrible things, as a result. Men who are more isolated, higher likelihood of suicide, higher likelihood of hurting somebody or committing sexual assault. Like there's all these different things that are associated with when a person's alone, especially when a man's alone, it's not a good thing. Men need to be around people, even if we don't feel like it. And I also feel, for me personally, that isolation kind of allowed me to hide and resort to numbing myself, which is, a bit self-destructive. Self-destructive, that's the word. And that came in many different forms. And yeah, just kind of slacking on the things that I know are good for me, because I started to feel not as worthy, right? And yeah, I mean, even in the Bible, right? I mean, as early as Genesis, God says that it is not good for man to be alone. And the crazy thing is a lot of people will then say, well, yeah, it's, that's why you need to be in a relationship, like a romantic relationship with a woman and have a wife. And I think it's much bigger than that. I think what God was pointing to was exactly what he said. It's not good for man to be alone at all. Like you could be single, but you could be single and not alone. So for me, making sure that I had a constant connection with people, I've realized is very important. And just because people haven't gone through whatever it is that you're going through, doesn't necessarily mean that you can't lean on them for support during times of, need and struggle, and when you're trying to figure things out. And I think that that's something that I really, really had to lean into more than ever. And I mentioned that within my wins of getting closer to my parents. And the other win that I'll say is, you know, finding some real friends here in Austin as well too, which, I mean, I can even, sometimes I get emotional thinking about it because there were times when I was really alone and didn't, want to interact with anybody and just kind of shut everything out. And those friends would reach out, and I mean, I remember I had a friend who he was like, "What are you doing right now?" "I'm coming over." Like he didn't even ask. He was just like, I'm doing it, because he could tell something was off. And yeah, just really appreciative of him for that. And just learning what real friendship looks like, what real love looks like, and wanting to also exemplify that on my end and extend that to other people as well too, I think has been a real big takeaway from this year. But again, pointing back to the lesson that it's not good to be alone. And the other thing that I'll say is underneath this lesson is that when my brother and I are locked in with one another and holding each other accountable, we accomplish really great things. For me personally, I find that, and I've told him this many a times, I feel like I step my game up when I know that he's watching me, because I am his older brother and because I am looking to be a good example, and I want to bring, him with me on this journey. I don't want to be the reason why we're, slacking or not achieving what we want to achieve. So I've just realized that that's a really really important relationship for me personally. And I've been blessed to have a brother who is in a similar mindset, similar situation in life, only 3 years younger than me. And the fact that we actually like each other. There's some people who don't have siblings that they can even speak to or be in the same room with. So that is a blessing. So anyway, that's the lesson learned. Gotta have fellowship, gotta have relationships. This next one, you probably have heard this analogy before, and I don't know who the person is who said it. It was kind of similar complexion to me, and I think he had a beard as well too. But people have shared this message from this fellow a couple of times. But he brought up this analogy of football, and he talked about how he didn't really understand this sport of football until he started like actually watching it and realizing that, oh wait, he thought the game was about scoring touchdowns, but what it's really about is getting a bunch of first downs. So for my people who are maybe not into football all that much, you have 4 opportunities to get a first down, which is 10 yards from where you're starting. So each one of those opportunities, once you get that first down, you are then reset to get another 4 tries to get then that first down, which is another 10 yards advanced. So his analogy it really struck me to the core, because I felt like this summer I had an experience where I was so focused on throwing a touchdown. I was so focused on just throwing the ball as deep and as far as I could and hoping that somebody caught it so that I could finally, advance to the next level of what I thought success was in my business. And that was a lesson that I learned this summer was, hey, Mont, like, just take things one step at a time, bro. Like, yes, you've been a business owner for 3.5 years, coming up on 4 years. And yes, you are looking to scale. You're looking to not be so much of a one-man operation with your coaching business. And you're also doing this on your own, right? So you don't necessarily have a coach or a mentor who's, helping you through these things. You're figuring it out on your own. So why don't you just focus on like getting those small wins and making each one of those steps uh, one at a time? And yeah, I felt like this summer I'd launched Fit and Faith program, which is the first time that I kind of incorporated my faith into, a fitness coaching offer. And I received a lot of interest into the program. And I think very quickly just started to, try to like handle all of it by hiring people very quickly. And within the month of, I think it was July, I was doing all of this all at once. So trying to manage like 5 people on a team and also managing the volume of people who are like interested in it, but then also trying to figure out like why aren't people showing up to calls when I booked them? And then like it was just so many different things that were happening. And that was essentially me trying to throw a Hail Mary. And, after that, it was like, okay, I felt like the ball was intercepted. I felt like the other team snagged the ball away from me. What a stupid mistake. Why would I throw that ball? And just like any, young NFL player or rookie or even in sports, like you gotta just get exposed to, ill-advised decisions to know that they're ill-advised. Because sometimes you don't want to be like super cautious to where you're not gonna see whether you're capable of making that throw or accomplishing that large feat. But at the same time, I've realized and learned from that, like, hey, just one step at a time. Okay, so that was the biggest thing that I took away from it, and just being consistent, especially when it comes to posting and marketing my business, hiring people, making that a much slower process. I mean, I was picking up people as quickly as I possibly could just to try to like save the day for me. And I winded up realizing that, hey, like I'm a business owner, I should have a process in order to hire somebody. I shouldn't just you know start working with someone just because they reached out to me or whatever have you. And by the way, I'm very thankful for everyone who has worked with me thus far. And I'm not saying that they weren't capable, but I think it's just more of like a mindset that I should have and an approach that I should have towards hiring people, where I'm looking to find the best option. I'm looking to, vet this thing out more thoroughly. So anyway, that was my lesson, focus on first downs, not touchdowns. Hopefully that resonates with you. The next one was more of a financial understanding, and I'll be, pretty vulnerable and honest with you guys. I won't share the details, but yeah, I mean, I was using business credit in order to make investments into my coaching business so that I could score that Hail Mary, right? Or score that touchdown or whatever. And I've just learned, and I feel like God has kind of forced me to learn that, hey, operate off of cash, because interest accrues. And I mean, there's many different instances in the Bible where it talks about, how much how ill-advised it is, I should say, to, loan to people with interest, but also to owe people is a position you don't want to be in. So yeah, I think I learned from that, like, hey, if I continue to use credit cards in order to invest in my business, then I'm going to have to not only fight to pay back that money that I put on the credit cards, but I'm also fighting the interest that accrues with that. So then that's also going to eat away at my bottom line and eat away at my margins, so that I'm really not making as much as I think I am. So anyway, that was a big takeaway, and something that I found out the hard way, right? And your boy is still working on recovering from that as well. The other thing, which is really important and something that I guess this will really be the first time that I'm sharing it publicly. But the lesson that I learned this past year was that I need to commit to celibacy, right? Like I really need to commit to that and make it a decision and act upon it. This year, full transparency, I wasn't perfect on that. And this, again, like I said, it's the first year I really was walking with the Lord. And earlier in the year, I was still having my foot in the world and how I used to operate and do things while also like trying to be more godly, right? And also trying to learn, like, am I allowed to do this? I thought as long as, like you start making up your own rules. And as I got through the Bible and as I spoke to other, folks who were walking their faith and actually committed to God's standard, I was like, one, oh, this is actually possible. It's not impossible to follow through with. Like, I can conquer my flesh. And then two, the other thing that I realized is that there's a whole bunch of logical reasons why it makes sense to wait, until marriage. And for me, I feel like one of the top reasons why I want to wait is because if I'm blessed to have a daughter one day, I would love to tell her about how I met her mother and we both committed to meeting God's standard in order for her to be alive today, so that she could see that as an example and not allow some young horny boy to convince her that, hey, we should do this because this is what we're feeling in the moment, and the emotions are high, and then she gets robbed of that experience of waiting until marriage as an example, right? So I think for me, I think a lot about like my potential future little daughter, if I'm blessed to have one, but I also think about my future son, obviously, and teaching the same lesson. But there's a whole laundry list of other reasons why I just don't think that it's productive to be fornicating. And I don't think that it serves either party. I think it's very much a temporary satisfaction. And I think it blinds people in their decision-making process to find the right partner, right? And granted, don't get me wrong, like I'm sure sexual chemistry is a huge part of a successful relationship, and especially a successful marriage, mainly. But those are things that could be figured out and worked out. And I mean, obviously there's some, I'm sure like questions about whether things will make sense sexually with the person you actually settle down with, but I'm going to wait until I find that stuff out first, via experience. I'm not going to try to sit here and make that the reason why I'm not going to commit to what God said. So my commitment to celibacy is something I am committing to. So plain and simple, keeping it there. This next lesson that I learned has been something that I've always experienced, but I think for the first time, I figured out the conditions in order to hear God's voice. That may sound crazy. And I think during certain parts of this year where I wasn't hearing God's voice, I'd probably say the same thing. I'd be like, yo, you're wild. Like I really couldn't stand when people talked about God told me, and trust me, there's people who probably lean a little bit too much into that God told me, okay? But what I realized is that when people are saying that God told me something, whether it be a pastor, whether it be just your everyday common believer, what they're really saying is I had a thought, I had an idea. There was something that came in their mind, and it came in the form of a voice, and it told them something. And that is the reality of it all. What I will say, though, is there is a reality behind where those ideas are coming from and what those ideas are representing. So you could have a lot of bad ideas come in your head, right? I mean, I don't know, like my fellows who are watching this, I don't know if you've ever been in an elevator and had this thought where you're looking and some guy comes into the elevator and you kind of wonder if you can just like, take him out real quick. You know what I mean? And again, I'm not encouraging this, but what I'm saying is that there's been many guys who I've talked to who we've all kind of talked about how there's some crazy thoughts that we have sometimes, and it's just, male ego, testosterone stuff popping up, and you just want to, challenge somebody, and that thought comes from a place. But then there's other thoughts that are more productive. There's thoughts that uplift you. There's thoughts that give you proper perspective about something you experience. And then there's maybe thoughts that you are directly saying, right? Like it's literally just you. So those are the three places that I think they come from. Now, when you get more spiritually inclined and you start to realize, where those voices and identify where those voices are actually coming from, then you can say the bad thoughts are from, your personal adversary, the enemy, the devil, and then the good ones from God, right? The Holy Spirit. And then, the ones from you are just from you, right? The way that I have learned to hear more from God is by setting the right conditions. When I'm as far away from committing sin on a perpetual basis and, consciously committing those sins, right? Like, not being of a sober mind, drunkenness or sexual sin or gluttony, those sort of sins where I know I'm doing something that is not what God wants me to do. Those things tend to separate me from the Lord, and it creates like this distance where his voice is not coming to me the same way. But also the thing that made me recognize his voice was finishing the Bible this year and hearing how God speaks to many different people within the Bible. And it becomes very clear what that voice sounds like, how he talks, and what it usually represents. So I would say all of those things, plus going into prayer and not just like talking at God and then leaving the conversation, but praying, asking for guidance on something, and then just stop talking. Just listen to whatever else comes into your mind at that point, and you'll be able to understand with time when it is God telling you something, right? When it's coming from a positive place, when it's uplifting you, when it's moving you forward and not focus so much on the past and blaming and, not giving grace. Because that's the God that we serve. He's a gracious God. He's a loving Father. So I just started to realize like, oh, that voice becomes a lot louder when I'm building the relationship and when I'm not doing things that separate me from him. So some of the things that I've taken away from my experiences in life and how those things would impact the conversations that I personally have with God. Okay, another lesson that I learned as well was the importance of initiating contact with friends and family. One, I've gotten so much more perspective on other people's struggles so that it makes me realize like, oh, I'm not alone. And people who I think or I thought maybe had everything together, I've had periods where they didn't have things together and they overcame. So you learn a lot more perspective and you get different success stories. And you also just don't know how appreciated it is for you to reach out to someone and initiate something like that. I also feel that, and as all believers, but I personally feel that, I'm representing Christ and Christ is the light of the world. So I want to carry that light wherever I go. So if I can find different ways to initiate, positive conversations with folks and whether, our beliefs get brought up or not, it's just sowing a good seed into the person. And it's allowing me to make that investment into them and also to, again, represent the Lord that I serve. So yeah, God called us to be stewards over our relationships as well too. And I want to be a faithful steward over those. The other thing that is kind of a part of that, but not necessarily with people that I know, is just being more engaging with strangers, which is pretty easy to do down here in Texas. I'm not going to lie to you. Everybody is pretty friendly, I've actually experienced a lot more people initiating conversations with me, especially older people. Older people, they love talking to, especially when you go to Costco, 9 a.m. executive membership, you walk in there and everybody's happy because it's like, there's no rush, no line, you just walk in and everybody's smiling. How you doing? Okay. All right. love that hat. Go UT. Like it's so easy to be so friendly down here. So yeah, I want to initiate that more often because again, I want to represent the God that I serve. I want to carry that light, and I just want to give an encouraging word to people. And I've realized how much that has helped me as well too. So the other thing that I mentioned, which was a win, was just volunteering. How important that is to do that on a consistent basis. I served the homeless twice this year, and I realized like, okay, I want to make this more of a routine, not just during the holidays, not just whenever someone invites me, but I actually want to go out and investigate how I'd like to help. Like I've really been thinking about like the Big Brother, Big Sister program and leaning into that and seeing if there's a young man that I could possibly take under my wing and just, show him around and talk to him and let him know that he's heard. So yeah, just a perspective shift on that, like the importance of actually volunteering consistently. A big one here that I may have mentioned a few times before in previous podcasts is I need to shift my perspective on dating, right? I've evaluated how I've looked at it this year, and I'm giving myself grace because again, like it's my first time really trying to be better and looking to make better decisions when it comes to who I date and how I date. So I give myself a lot of grace because, like I said, it's my first swing at it. But after a year of doing things, I've realized like, okay, there's some things that I need to change. One, especially as Christians and believers, I'm sure that there's been some experiences where you go on a date and it feels like an interview. And I don't think that's really how it's supposed to be. Like, I like to make people laugh and I like to enjoy my time when I'm in front of somebody. And I found myself going more into like interview mode because I was like, oh, well, I know she needs to fit these criteria, X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, that's not what this is for, and I don't think that's really sowing a good seed because I think a woman can tell when and can feel when, the intentions and when the vibes are just off. So laughter, having a good time, experiencing something together, I think that's something that I want to lean more into. But the other thing that I'll mention about dating is like also feeling that I need to have everything perfect in my life in order to date at all. So what I would do is I would fall into these just strong pendulum swings where one day I'm dating and I'm like hyper like fixated on making sure that she is the one and that, all right, she meets the qualifications, she answered all the questions, all right, now we can move on. I go on that side of the spectrum, or the pendulum, I should say, and then I swing to the other side where I just hide and I avoid all contact. I'm like, I'm not talking to any, I don't even want to look at a woman because I know I'm not ready. And that could be so dangerous and it's so far from the truth. I've learned so many successful couples who tended to meet when usually the man was at his lowest, right? And I always found that very encouraging because I'm like, oh wow, like I don't have to be perfect in order to, meet my wife. Like, if anything, that's a good sign that she actually loved me for me, and not for whatever it is that I can provide. So that was a big perspective shift on dating that I made, and also just realizing like, look, I'm 30, but I have time. Like, it's not something I need to, figure out immediately. So that was a big takeaway for me. Okay, I promise we are at the last two. The second to last one that I wanted to mention is just having. I learned that especially because I've gotten into some of the best shape that I've been into this year, or that I've been in this year, that can come with its own problems, right? Because then if you don't maintain that, or if you start slipping in certain areas, I started to attach my worth to my appearance. And this was the time where I was objectifying myself a lot more on social media, and not objectifying myself, but just posting a lot more like shirtless pictures and stuff. It wasn't like I was trying to thirst trap, but I think I was trying to show like, hey, here's the progress that I'm making, and here's what I'm doing in order to get it done. And yeah, I just started to focus so much more on like the results that I was getting and what my body fat percentage is, what's my weight on the scale, all the opposite things that I would tell my clients. I was doing all of those things. So I've recently reframed and just realized like, hey, let me just focus on the habits. Let me focus on making sure I'm eating the right stuff and the right amounts of those things, doing my workouts, tracking my workouts, and just allowing the results to come as they will, because I have faith that they will. So a big perspective shift for me. And the last one, which is very important, and I'm sure everybody has their own struggles with this, and or maybe not, but it's just having a better system when it comes to stewarding my finances. I don't want to be impulsive anymore. And I don't think, honestly, I don't really spend much, but I think when it comes to even my business, like I will often justify investing into it because I'm like, oh, well, that's an investment. It's going to return. Well, it's like, well, do a little bit more of a thorough dive on whether this makes sense for you and don't just impulsively pull the trigger on it because it's an investment, right? So evaluate that investment, make sure it's something that you could actually use given this period that you're in your business. So anyway, we are probably around an hour right now. I'm going to stop here. Stay tuned for the next episode where I tell you how I'm going to apply all these things to 2026. I do appreciate you listening for this entire episode. I think we're about an hour. So if there's any comments or questions, feel free to, comment on this post, and please subscribe to this episode. Okay. Hope that you've been encouraged to bet on yourself and pursue all that life has in store for you. God bless. I'm out.